Just explain what just happened.
I could die tomorrow, and I don't want to regret not following Jesus with everything I can. I know some churches interpret that as actually 1260 years. Hey guys, tonight I'm doing a video on how to interpret the Bible through astrotheology. What is astrotheology, you guys are gonna be asking? Well, the word astrotheology basically is astro, which is astronomy. It's really actually scientific, so you just look at the stars, the shape they make, and you can get some context. I think it helps us get the context for a lot of these ancient scriptures, mythologies, anything and everything. I think is comes from our language, especially comes from the stars and the zodiac, and because in the ancient times that was their map, that was their theater, that was their basically their navigation system. Is the sky, right? And it's syncretism, which is we're basically uniting all these different paradigms and looking at the roots of where they came from. So that's what astrotheology is. And so what is astrotheology? Theology founded on observation or knowledge of the celestial body. It usually exposes the origins of religions and mythologies. It benefits humanity by deconstructing false paradigms and building up real mathematical and observable truths. A lot of it is based on the zodiac, so we're going to look at the Mazzaroth and the zodiac and how this was a foundation for a lot of the language. A common understanding of this is the zodiac originated and was developed between 3,200 to 500 BC. Although versions of it could have gone back 40,000 or 60,000 years, right? You guys are probably wondering, well, how did you get into this if you grew up in a Christian family, right? Or a Christian community with all these churches everywhere. So that's like my background. So that's sort of why I came to astrotheology. Because that has theology, so astrotheology is a compartment of this broad spectrum of different theologies. So, right, I grew up in a Christian family. It's fairly liberal. In 2014, I started to see miracles in the charismatic church. I studied the Bible, and I got stuck in this cult. Right, I don't recommend it. But I was in there for 9 months in 2016, where my personality is I explore. So I was looking into that to build my faith for myself, to understand it for myself. But that was also the same reason I left that church 9 months later. So it was 50 doctrines, and a lot of it was Seventh-day Adventist doctrines. So I was actually this futurist, sort of. Well, I was a futurist, and I believed Second Coming of Christ was in our future, and all that. And so then, once I got out of there, I was like, okay, I need to look at all the different views of eschatology. So then I studied eschatology, and then Jonathan Welton, somebody recommended him, and he is a partial preterist. So I started getting into all these different kinds of preterism. And then I read Don K. Preston's book, and I became a full preterist. And at the same time, I was learning from Ed Stevens, and they have these different resurrection views. And it was at this point I discovered that consistent preterism meant that the Bible was basically only for Israel to be saved from their law. And that just makes sense with where the inspirations seem to stop in history. But again, Jesus was coming in their last days according to all the time statements, and it did not make a lot of sense, the metaphors. Right? At the same time, even if the Bible was for Israel, well, that didn't make sense either, because of these metaphors being used in all cases. So right, we have these two sides: the preterist guys who believe the new covenant keeps going, and we have the Israel-only guys who think this was only for Israel. Well, what if there's this third view that it was basically this mythologies based on the zodiac, based on the movement of the ecliptic, and this was based on the Stoic philosophy, where they believed that you would ascend, and by living a virtuous life, you could become the stars in the sky, and that is something else I would look into. I didn't have it in this presentation, but look into the Stoic philosophies, and the different philosophies in the first century. Right, first century is one of the most well documented periods. Although some of that was actually from like 3rd century, people think it was the 1st century. So just start looking, just start studying for yourself. After studying more of the ancient historical context, I began to realize that the mythological views were based on the observable universe, and that the astronomical nature of the biblical metaphors made more sense under that paradigm. So that basically means that I just started seeing the Bible more as a mythology than as actual historical characters. And I think you'll begin to understand that as we get into this. Right? You don't have to understand everything right now. I'm just going to keep going. Does the Bible condemn astrotheology? So some religious people will just shut it down and sweep it under the rug because they think, the Bible has verses against it. Yes, it does have a few verses against astrology and the sort of the magical witchcraft stuff, but there's a difference between astrology and astrotheology, where we're looking at astrotheology to get a context for how words are being used in the Bible and what it would have meant to the people at that time in the 1st century. What would the language be? So what's the audience relevance, right? Preterists always say context is king, right? So 2 verses are often quoted to sweep astrotheology under the rug. Well, there's actually a lot of verses that they like to quote, but there's verses for both sides, and I'd say there's more verses for astrotheological side. So I was going to actually quote 2 verses here specifically, but I didn't get quite around to finding the other one because I was just having a conversation with somebody, and he gave me these 2 verses, and one was in Exodus. I know the other one was this Deuteronomy one here. But you can look those up yourself, where the law of Moses sort of condemns these astrologists. The problem with that is, right, if in, for instance, the story of Hercules, basically Zeus told told a group of gods not to look into the planets. Let's say, don't do this, it's the law, or I'll kill you, right? We wouldn't say, we can't look at how Zeus represents the planets, right? Because the whole story is this mythology. So you have to take a step back. You have to get a big picture view. You can't just think within the confines of Scripture to understand Scripture, right? You can't just look at one little piece of history to understand the whole language of that history. I hope you can understand that. The Old Covenant is just one of like 7 different covenants in the Bible. And the Old Covenant in Hebrews 8:13 actually passed away. So these laws don't even really apply. Paul called it a veil of darkness that kept the Israelite tribes from seeing the truth. So we can't quote these verses in the Old Testament and apply them to today, to modern astrology. The New Covenant was not directly about us either, right? Because in the New Covenant it says they will no longer teach their neighbor. Well, what am I doing now? I'm teaching my neighbor, right? I'm trying to get the truth out there, and I'm trying to get people free. So the new covenant was connected to this new creation idea. Again, that's Hebrews chapter 8. We're not the house of Israel. Hebrews 8 chapter 8 verse 10 says, the new covenant, God would make it with the house of Israel, right? So these preterists like to debate, well, who are the Gentiles? But they never get into who is actually the house of Israel. And what you actually find with astrotheology is that the Israel, in a roundabout way, is actually the zodiac. And each sign, there's 12 signs, and they're called houses. So against this condemnation of astrology, the Bible actually endorses and teaches us to look to the stars as signs of what God is telling us. And you can look up these verses for yourself. Just pause the video. Jesus himself is actually called a sign in the beginning of the Gospels, right? And he was born under the star. In Revelation, Jesus is called the morning star. So we need to understand the stars if we're going to understand the Bible. The Bible has hundreds of references to objects in the sky, right? You just begin to study where these words come from and the etymology, not just the definitions, the etymology of how these words changed over time. And you begin to see, okay, you can peel back the layers and you can keep peeling back and you begin to see it, right? So there's a difference between astrotheology and astrology. I said that. And these groups of people, they think that they're being scientific, okay? And I think that they are scientific, that it's just this isn't some occult word. And the word occult actually just means hidden, right? What did Jesus say? I'll speak things hidden since the foundation of the world. So Jesus right there, Matthew 13 says the whole Testament. He said it's all occult, or all hidden. And so we shouldn't be afraid of that word. We shouldn't be afraid of these words. I know sometimes we have these thought-stopping patterns in our mind, and we have these doctrines that we react to, and we've been taught a certain way. The Bible endorses us to actually look at these things. So my purpose is to understand the religious setting in which the authors of the Bible would have received their ideas. And I actually, like in this one Bible study I was in, they said that the whole Bible could be described in one word, and that word is feasts, right? And this is the leading pastor of this church in Canada, of this denomination, and you begin to see what he means when you study this Exodus theme. So the Exodus is about the Israelites going from slavery in Egypt to the promised land, right? So they spend 40 years in the wilderness to get there. Well, that's the story of the zodiac. And that's what I began to see through preterism without even studying astrotheology. And I saw it in every book in the Bible. So this astrotheology thing is literally absorbed into the text. So we can't just ignore it. It also explains a lot of the language in the Bible, I believe. I always had questions. Okay, how did Paul know that he was already seated in heavenly places? And then I understood, well, there's a constellation of the throne, and he says we are seated in the heavens. So this is straight up in the sky in the northern hemisphere, the northern solstice, the summer solstice, where the Egyptians thought, well, this is the gate to heaven, right? So then this language in the Bible makes sense, right? So the Bible condemns astrologers in some places, right? But it does not condemn astrology, for it is astrotheology. So, right, okay. Who was using it? Today we have somehow forgotten the constellations in our religious institutions. All these ancient peoples learned about God and meaning through the natural world, especially the sky. And right, we even see Paul in Romans referencing nature, that God has made the truth plain through nature. So the sky should be the most obvious piece of nature in which we can learn about God, right? Understanding the zodiac. Etymology. Etymology is basically the study of the words, where it came from. So the etymology of the word zodiac is basically the circle of little animals. So the zodiac is a belt of the heavens, and it's within about 8 degrees either side of the ecliptic. It includes all apparent positions of the sun, moon, and the most familiar planets. Right, and you always see it listed in that order in the Bible, because the sun is chief rank among those. It is divided into 12 equal divisions or signs, and I would recommend starting just to read these over and over again. The circle with the 12 signs or houses is the constellations which the sun passes through every year on the path of its ecliptic. It's nothing occult or scary. The ecliptic meaning is a great circle on the celestial sphere, representing the sun's apparent path during the year, so called because lunar and solar eclipses can occur only when the moon crosses the ecliptic. Some new words. I'll just let you guys pause and read that. So this is what the zodiac looks like in its most simple form. You have divided into 12 pieces, the pie. So here you have it's cut in half and across the center, and that represents the line going through the middle represents the equinoxes, and the line going up and down, the vertical line, represents the solstices, because the year is divided in half by those two moments. And when the sun passes over the spring equinox, that's when you have Passover, and that's the first festival of the Jews and the Israelites in the Old Testament, in Leviticus 23 and Deuteronomy 16. So symbols do not look like the constellations, so you need to actually look up what these constellations look like. A good way to do that, basically the Google Earth of the stars, is Stellarium, and so that's what I found actually through this guy's YouTube channel who's been using it and teaching this stuff, Matheson Corollary, and you can look him up on YouTube, and he has some good stuff to learn. So here's one image from the Stellarium app. So here you just scroll back on your wheel and you can get a bigger field of view of the sky, and then you can see how the Milky Way actually crosses the zodiac, and it crosses the zodiac in the northeast and crosses to the southwest of the circle of the zodiac. So in there's some old books. I'm reading Stowe's Bible Astrology right now, and right, and in this picture you see he says the Lord of our solar system is this little snake. So I'll just show it to you quickly here. Again, he wasn't a preterist, but but he did know his astrology, I think, decently well. And he right, we hasn't changed much because the stars don't change much on their cycles. Everything in their solar system is based on those cycles. So he's got a lot of good pictures and stuff here, but I took that picture of the snake from here, and he says it's the lord of our solar system, and I think he's talking about this, the Milky Way galaxy, because it looks like the snake's head, which surrounds the whole system. And you also find some significant constellations that have the snake as well, but they're actually in the same location as the snake head. But yeah, so I would recommend, again, you can find a lot of this information on Santos Bonacci's YouTube channel, Mr. Astrotheology. And this is how I learned about this. So here again you have, so each of these signs is split into different sort of magnetic or seasonal influences. So these are just the aspects of each season. So you have the cardinal, which is the beginning or growth of spring. You have fixed, which is basically you're in the middle of spring now, and it's growing up, or it's at middle age, you could say. And then mutable is it's dying. So spring is dying in the mutable sign. So you have these are called the quadruplicities. And so there's 4 cardinal signs, there's 4 fixed, and there's 4 mutable. So how did we get our year? If you start to think about it, it's based on this 365 days. These are the 12 months or moon cycles. This is also the time it takes for the sun to return to the same spot in the sky, because of the rotation or the tilt of the earth, right? So the earth is tilted, and the earth goes all the way around the sun, and the sun appears to arrive at the same spot in the sky at this time. So the zodiac, again, it's based on this. It's not, we have the solar system in our mind, but the zodiac is basically the ancient solar system, because they had it as the earth is a geocentric solar system. So the earth was the center of their universe, and the stars in the sky seem to be moving across and around the world in their orbits. And we have that quoted in the 1st century and before Christ as well. So the zodiac goes back, again, 3,000 years. The zodiac, this is why in Genesis Enoch lived 365 days. This is the synodic period of the sun. And so I basically just explained that. I would recommend watching this guy's video series, Randall Carlson on the Great Year. This is an old picture of the path of the sun on the ecliptic, or on the equator. Why do all these gods have their right hand up and their left hand down? Well, right hand is where the sun exalts in Aries, so it's being exalted. In Matthew 25, you have the sheep and the goats, and on the right hand is the righteous sheep, and on the left hand is Libra, where the sun sets, right? The sun god Set from ancient Egypt, and Set was the god of death, and the sun was setting. Do not let the sun set on your anger, right? So the Libra is the scales of judgment, right? And this is where you find in the lower half of the zodiac, this is the wilderness. This is the valley of slaughter. This is nighttime in the day cycle. In the yearly cycle, this is fall and winter. And right, you start at the head and you go around, and it ends at the feet, the 2 feet in Pisces. So these are all based on the season of the year. The first month of the year used to be March, right? Because Mars dominates Aries. And in French, March is Mars. You have, this is the Ram, which is in Hebrew, Rama means high place. So this is your high place. This is your head. And you have all these overlapping themes all the way through the zodiac. So here's another picture. You can get these from Santo Spinacci's website and print them off if you want. Again, you can overlap these cycles on the zodiac and you start to understand even more. You have the moon cycles, right? So every month you have a new moon. Well, the new moon starts down in Capricorn, and at the top it's a full moon in Cancer. So this is the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. The orbital period is 27.3 days. So this is just some information. The horsemen of the apocalypse in Book of Revelation. This is all on Santo Spinacci's channel as well. But again, the white horse is the spring equinox, right? It's the white light of the sun, which breaks into 7 colors of the rainbow, or into the light that we're in. The green horse of summer, when everything turns green. Red horse of the sunset is the autumnal equinox. AU is gold, so this could be the gold horse. You have the black horse, and that's in midnight, or the winter solstice, when the sun is at its lowest point on the ecliptic. The word solstice means sun stands still. So the sun seems to stand still for 3 days on its path in the ecliptic. So they say the sun dies. It looks like the sun's getting smaller as you go into winter. And so the fall season, the middle of the fall season, is usually associated with the darkest, and that's Scorpio. And the Taurus, or the bull, in spring is mid-spring. That's usually he's ruling spring. So you have the golden bull, right? Or the ox. And then after the sun starts, after the sun is done being at the bottom of the ecliptic, starts moving up again. So the Egyptians would call it their risen savior, right? And the sun would start going back up on the circle or the belt of the zodiac. And then it goes up through this Aquarius, which is like the Ark and Noah's Ark, going up through the tribulation of winter. This is a time of tribulation. And so this can also be split into, like, this bottom half is usually associated with the female energy, or the negative energy, in terms of electricity. And then the top half is the male energy, or the positive energy. And these, or summer months, right? The harvest, months of harvest. And then the bottom half is the months of testing, right? So that had nothing to do with condemning women. It's about this different kinds of energy, the balance in the universe. It's all about these cycles that we go through in the universe. And and it's all symbolic. So those are the 12 stones of the high priest. Sapphire, so it goes all the way around the first to the last, right? And I like to have the zodiac like this because it's clockwise, even though it's rising on the left side is actually it's supposed to be in the east, so it kind of would make more sense to be on the right side. Because north is the gate to heaven, and the southern one is the gate of Hades, or the jaws. So this is the Exodus motif, sort of loosely. I just drew it up quickly. I was trying to get an understanding of how basically Moses goes into the sea. First he goes in the Reed Sea, and then he goes through the Jordan. And then in the book of Joshua, chapters 1, or the first few chapters, it says that the reproach of Egypt had now left them. So the reproach of Egypt left them after, even though they had been in the wilderness for this period of 40 years. Well, again, 40 in the Bible, these numbers, they're not to do with counting as much as they are to do with these symbols. So 40 meant the time it takes to be transformed, or a period of testing. So this was the time of testing in the wilderness. Or the time of, again, you take your harvest in the fall, and these ancient agricultural days. Most of this planet today even is agricultural, and you get tested by winter season when things don't grow. Right, so we have Jesus and the cornerstone. So now we're getting sort of into the Egyptian themes, right? So this was as above, so below in Egypt. Well, as above is the stars, as below is that what we just talked about is the lower half, the zodiac, which represents the flesh. And again, as above, so below. Jesus is the head, but he's also the foot, or the first and the last, right? So he is the chief cornerstone. So he's the head, and he's the foundation. So on the internet, you look up cornerstone, you'll find pictures like the one on the left. But he is, right? He is the chief cornerstone, because he's parallel to the gods of Egypt, the sun gods, Ra and Horus, and all these. There's 20 different stories of people of these gods who have the same, did all the same things that Jesus did. Born of a virgin, baptized when they're 30, basically killed, rose 3 days later, etc., etc. There's 20 or more probably different stories, and it goes back probably 5,000 years, 10,000 years or more. And so that's what we're discovering through archaeology and just all the evidence that we need to take into account, right? Circumcision began with the Egyptians. So this is, again, there aren't any concepts in the Bible. It's what I'm beginning to realize is there's none of these concepts in the Bible that were original. So there was nothing really new in the Bible. The Bible itself says there's nothing new under the sun, S-U-N. And that was a wisdom book. So the sun in the summer seasons is associated with sight and wisdom, because you're not hidden in darkness anymore. So the circumcision was the flesh being cut off, which is in Scorpio, whereas your genitals are, which is the fall of man, where they're cast out of Eden, which is the upper half of the zodiac. Eden is the stars. So this was in Egyptian practice, for cleanliness and purity. You have a nativity scene going back thousands of years, 2000 BC about, and they found another one in 2016. It goes back 5,000 years, and that was in Egypt as well. They have the man and the woman, the star in the east, and the two animals. You have this verse in Hebrews. It says, Paul is speaking of the Pharisees and the Old Covenant Jews. He says they serve a copy and shadow of the heavenly things. For when Moses was about to erect the tent, he was instructed by God, saying, see that you make everything according to the pattern that was shown to you on the mountain. So Moses, right, he went up the mountain a bunch of times, up and down, up and down. Well, it's the cycle. And he went up the mountain and he saw, God showed it to him. So he saw it and he saw a pattern, and that was a pattern of the zodiac, because we know that the temple, tabernacle, follows the cycle of the stars. Jesus is the door and the gate in the east, and that he rises through the courtyard, which is the physical realm, so then he goes into the holy place, or the hypo-style hall, and then he enters into the sanctuary, again, the most holy place, in the east, right? So it goes up and down season. Anyway, I haven't done a direct study on this one, but again, this is just to show you that it's basically came from the Egyptian temple, and to encourage you to look into these things. So here we have heaven and earth concept, Nut and Geb. As time progressed, the Geb deity became more associated with the habitable land of Egypt. Right, so in Galatians 4:26, it says the Jerusalem above is our mother. So this is the same sort of idea. This is the Nut above is our mother. So the word Egypt basically means the temple of the soul of Ptah, or Peter, or it was a creative god associated with Memphis. Acts 7:22, we know that Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, right? So did he know what the word Egypt meant? I'm sure he did. The Egyptian temples were built for the official worship of the gods, even though, again, Moses was another character in this story who represents, probably had horns, and he was going through the zodiac, the constellation of Ophiuchus, who has the serpent in his hands, or the serpent staff, and he crosses the reed. The Milky Way looks like a river of reeds. So you have the Reed Sea, which is being crossed by the serpent staff holding Ophiuchus at the just around the winter solstice, when all flesh of Egypt dies, the firstborn dies. Again, this is very, very fishy. Egyptian temples were built for the official worship of the gods. In Exodus, Moses is called a god. Chapter 7, verse 1. So here we have, basically, to show you, you can go to Bible Hub and you can look up, you just find your Bible verse, click on sort of the top right of the screen, there's a lexicon button, and then you get this screen, and you can look up the original Hebrew and Greek words of the Bible. And then you can also Google the etymology for that word. Here you have the Lord's Prayer and how it goes through the 12 signs of the zodiac. The word Elohim is plural of El. Some tips. Learn about the great year. That's a big piece of these ages and the transition. 2,000 years ago was the precessional transition. It was the end of a 25,920 year cycle. And we were moving into the age of Pisces from Aries. And so the new age began. And we've been in the age of the fish, the two fish, for the last 2,000 years. So that's why you had all this language of sheep and goats in the Old Testament, and then all this language of fish in the New Testament, fisher of man. Important fields of study would be, again, numerology, mythology, sacred geometry, gematria, archaeoastronomy. Again, numerology is a big one. If you look up the meaning of these numbers in the Bible, that's really helped me. And because you see how it's connected to the planets. And here's a few books to buy. And that's it. So that was my sort of PowerPoint I threw together the last couple days. And I hope you guys like it. I hope you guys look into this more. And you can start to see where the Bible came from, where these concepts came from. And you can just include it in your basically lenses of interpretation. The more the better, right? The clearer it gets, the more the more paradigms you understand. Again, Hosea 4:6 says, "My people perish for a lack of knowledge." So I would just encourage you guys to get the knowledge and to grow and learn. And keep a good attitude. Thanks for watching, guys. That was my introduction to astrotheology. And I'm probably going to just go and take a break and go to bed. So we'll see you guys later.